Hello, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural episode of WristCheeseRadio, a watch podcast dedicated to orological hot takes, taboo topics, and in most cases, unpopular watch opinions. My name is Schmidt, one of your hosts here, and I'm joined by my co-host. You guys know him. He's a man who really needs no introduction, the horological meme master of the watch world, Mr. Bro Dinky. Bro, what is going on, my friend? How are we doing?
Schmitty, that was beautiful. Thank you very much. It's a great night here on a beautiful Thursday, recording some watch talk on our inaugural episode. And I think we're going to have some fun shedding some light on some things that a lot of people don't talk about. So,
okay, all right.
Very excited for that.
Yeah, me too, my friend. So this is something that you and I have kind of mulled over for a while now. It's been a little bit of a pet project for both of us, I think, and this is something that we've wanted to do. You've been on several guest appearances on podcasts before, but this is kind of your first foray into the world. So obviously this is new. This is the first episode. We're recording it for the first time. But why don't you tell our fans, our listeners, who hopefully will become fans, exactly what we're trying to do here and how we're going to be different than let's say, everybody else?
I think if you're a fan of watch podcasts or maybe any podcast in general, I think a lot of them come with a certain amount of caution. Right, they have to be kind of judicious as to what they say, as to who they anger, because a lot of people also tie their podcasts with a blog, with a website, and a lot of times they do reviews, they sell things, or they're trying to get to a bigger platform, and as a result, they have to be kind of careful who they piss off, and we don't, which is great, because not that that's ever been really a concern of mine, but I understand why a lot of people have to worry about that. So I think people will appreciate the unfiltered, kind of genuine opinions that we have to offer. And I know you've been in this a long time, longer than I have, and you have some insights to areas of this industry that I don't, which is great because I always appreciate that, because as much as I like to fancy myself a watch collector and, you know, some kind of horological stud on the internet here, I'm not as savvy as a lot of people, especially in the inner workings and specs wise. I can hold my own, but I don't have that kind of vast knowledge that I know you do. And so I'm glad you'll be able to hold up that end of the bargain for me a little bit. So we aren't expecting any sponsors. We don't get guests or free stuff, and we don't have to really worry about who we're ticking off. And I guess that means we have integrity that can't be bought. And I think people are going to really enjoy that. And just from what we've discussed in the past, too much goes unsaid. Too many things get a free pass for one reason or another. And I think it's time somebody calls BS on these things once in a while, or somebody offers an alternate opinion, not even necessarily being negative or calling things out, just offering a different side of things that not a lot of people get, because there's so much influence out there from whether it be brands or publications. And you don't know, as the consumer, how much of that is, let's say, pay for play. And what I mean by that is how much of that is paid for content, right? Yeah. If a company is paying you to write about their product, can you really be that critical? I mean, even if you were like, okay, I'm going to make this seem so unbiased by throwing little digs or what I would change here and there, you still have to curb that a little. And you're going to have to send them a copy of that, and they're going to have to approve that, right? You're not going to be able to just throw that out there and say, well, I hope that doesn't really make them mad. No, they're going to say, take this out, and I want you to talk more about this because that's what I paid for. And I'm
exactly. And I think for a lot of people, and I couldn't really have said it any better than how you described it. I think there's just a lot of, things that are a little bit disingenuous in the industry. And I think it's a lot because, this is a very small community. Everyone kind of knows everybody. And, when it comes to brands and people who are going to promote these brands, there's always going to be a working relationship. And as you said, it's kind of a pay for play, right? Because it's a double-edged sword. If I'm producing content, I'm trying to monetize and trying to earn a living from this, I have to say things that brands will be enticed by to send me their stuff. So then I have other things to say. This is a podcast that doesn't care about that. We want to bring you guys the unfiltered, the raw, the nitty-gritty of the industry. And that's why our name is WristCheeseRadio. The world of horology is beautiful. When you look at these watches, they're great. When you flip them over, there's always a dark, ugly side that never gets discussed. And that's what we're going to bring to you guys today. That's what this podcast is all about.
And I think that's a beautiful description, to be honest. And so I guess throughout this episode, we'll give you both our kind of candid opinions on sort of the industry as a whole right now. And I think you'll get a little insight as to who we are a little more, both as your hosts and as collectors, because I know not a lot of people know me. I mean, I've been, like you said, on a few different podcasts, and they always ask you the same questions. How did you get into watches? What was your first luxury watch?
Sure.
And like, that's all great, but it's all kind of cookie cutter. Like, that's kind of what you would get if you were getting an interview from a magazine or something like that. You don't really get a feel for somebody as a collector until you've, I think, seen part of their collection and things like that. And I don't think we'll get too much into necessarily that, but also kind of get their opinions on things and why they like certain things, why they don't like other things, and maybe, I guess, the way their journey has shaped them as a collector, maybe, because I think collectors kind of get forgotten in this hobby nowadays. Everything is very kind of material.
Yeah, 100%.
It used to be kind of collector-centric, which was kind of the cool part, where it was all about, oh, this is me, and I have X, Y, Z, and I've sort of been trying to put together a collection of such and such, with whether it's an idea or whether it's certain types of pieces, whether you're maybe a chronograph person, a diver person, or you just wanted a really nicely well-versed collection of varieties. Like, you used to be able to put that together and kind of explain yourself, or somebody could even just look at it and be like, well, this is an interesting bunch.
Yeah.
What made them go this route? Like, I would love to know what made this person choose all of these. And I feel like we've gotten so far away from that.
Yeah. I mean,
so far into the material aspect of this hobby, it's a little bit sickening at times.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think back before, at least when I started, and this was many, many, many years ago. And obviously you guys don't know who I am, and that's fine. But to give you a little bit of background about me, I started reading Hodinkee when it was 1 year old. Back then, there was very few players in the game, especially that were producing any type of editorial content that was worth digesting, right? You had Hodinkee. A couple years later, you had Worn and Wound, and then you had a blog to read back before it was a blog to watch. So again,
Wow.
Showing you how old this is the thing. A lot of people don't know that it was a blog to read first.
I didn't.
But there was a lot less stuff out there. And so, if you were a budding watch enthusiast like I was at the time, and I was very young, very, very young, far too young to even think about ever owning a nice luxury watch, the only place up until these websites started coming out was the dark, cavernous depths of the forums, which, as you guys know, are bastions of inclusivity and just the best types of people on the internet. Like, these guys were amazing. And, it was just one of those things that's like, it was so toxic that I had to remove myself. And so all of a sudden, these websites start popping up, and it's like, okay, now finally there's an area of inclusivity. There's an area where I can get information that's just about producing good information for people who are also like-minded and interested in watches. And back then, it was about a curation of a collection, right? If I was going to pick something, I wanted it to be unique and special, and I wanted to be able to relay that to the next guy who also had something unique and special. Nowadays, all you see are Wall Street bros with the same white Dell Daytona and the blue Tiffany OP and the new 41, ceramic sub with the green bezel. It's all the same stuff. And so on and so forth. We see everybody's collection today, and they've almost co-opted the same personality. There's really, in my opinion, today, no diversity of thought in the collections anymore. And like, now, if you are the guy that has like the weird collection because you don't have the mainstream pieces, you're like, well, what's wrong with that dude? Like, why doesn't he have this, this, and this? I guess he's really not a collector.
That, or he bought all these to scratch the itch. He couldn't get XYZ. He had to.
Exactly.
He bought an itch scratcher. That's, I guess that's a cool starter watch.
Yeah, it's a placeholder somehow. I chose a Doxa over something else, or I chose a 300-meter Omega over a Submariner. I guess he just can't get the big boy watch, so he must not be really a big player in the game. And that's such a toxic mentality that never used to exist.
And those are the type of things that I've discussed before, kind of that herd mentality that I feel like kind of ruins things for people. And I think that was the goal when we had originally discussed doing a podcast, was I wanted to open up conversations like that and these new kind of different point of view conversations for people who are probably in the same boat as us and either afraid to voice their opinion or don't have anybody who's willing to listen because, let's face it, there's a ton of group thinking out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And people DM me all the time because they just tell me I don't have anybody else to talk to. And I respect that. And I almost always answer back. And that's fine. But I feel like they also have probably tried to reach out to people maybe who own similar watches to them or they thought they were on the same level as, and maybe got shut down. Like even me, I've had some pretty, I don't know what you want to call them, highbrow conversations with people where somebody would DM me and we're talking, and then next thing you know, they're like trying to show off their, oh, check out this I got, and check out, which on certain levels is fine, but like, I'm not going to be impressed. Like if you're trying to impress me with your hard to get Rolex collection, good for you. But I'd much rather you be like, dude, I waited 5 years for this Daytona and I churned out every dollar of my blood, sweat, and tears and bought this thing and I'm over the moon. Good for you, man. That's what I want to hear. Not, oh, well, I bought this one and then I traded up with this and it was I had to buy a bunch of Black Bays, but I finally got my call. I honestly could care less. I should say I couldn't care less, but yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's, man, it's just, it makes me laugh because it's so sad that people will actually do this, right? And I know that you and I had talked offline about this before, that you had somebody that slid in your DMs and they shall remain anonymous, but somebody had slid in your DMs and they're like, hey man, I finally got the call to go in there and buy my, Grail Submariner. It was the watch I've always wanted. It was my exit watch. I started an exit watch, but then I flipped it.
Because I couldn't turn down $3,000 or whatever.
And I'm thinking to myself, like, when you told me this story, I was like, I have to be taking crazy pills. Like, how can you say that watch was the only watch you would ever want to own? You would sell your child for it. It was like the watch to get. You finally get it, which is a rare opportunity for anybody on the planet to get this watch and own it. And then you sold it because somebody dangled $3,000 more? Like, obviously it wasn't that important of a watch for you to own. It wasn't that much of something that was going to be your next exit watch.
I'd almost rather you told me I shouldn't have spent that much on a watch in the first place. And at that point, I flipped it over because I wanted to get my money back and I had an opportunity to get a little more. And I shouldn't have spent that money to begin with. So I recouped it and I feel comfortable again. I would have rather you've told me that and just been like, I was outside of my comfort zone and I shouldn't have gone there, than be like, this was the one, but I let it go because a win is a win. Like, I really didn't know what to reply to that at that point. I was like, I guess that's cool, man, but are you going to regret that? And I honestly don't really remember the guy's reply. I kind of tuned him out after that, but disappointing to say the least.
Absolutely. 100% disappointing because obviously it wasn't that important.
Right.
I mean, for me, the way that I've always approached collecting and being an enthusiast in the hobby is every watch should have a meaning. Every watch should have a story, right? Not the story that like, oh, you finally got the call from the AD and you went in and go pick it up. No, like, this was your great grandfather's watch. He gave it to you. You'll never really wear it because it's way too small and the gold plate case is falling apart, but it's just too sentimental to give away because your grandfather was an awesome dude. Like, that's the kind of story that I want to hear. I picked up this Seiko 5 because when I got into watches, it was all I could afford, and it will always be a reminder for me of where I came from.
Those are fun
in my collecting journey. That's the story, right? That has power. That has impact. It has resonance, and it's something that most of us can understand and relate to. In today's world, I look at somebody posting a Richard Mille online, I'm like, unfollow. Because for me, it's unrealistic. The average consumer is in no way buying Richard Milles. And even if it is an aspirational goal, it's just not for me. It's just like, it just seems like a cop out. It seems like a sellout position, right? Like, oh, look at me and I can get this. And there's going to be people in the DMs, I'm sure, that are like, oh, well, you're just a hater. because you can't get it. You know what? Even if I had the money, I still wouldn't.
And I think that's fair. I think it's a bit of to each their own, but also I never really understand the entire concept of the flex piece. I get it once in a while you want to show off, and I don't kid anybody, right? I own a Rolex. It's a Polar Explorer 2. Did I buy a Rolex to own a Rolex? Yeah, of course I did. I think anybody who buys a brand with any kind of prestige attached to the name, I think if they tell you they didn't buy it for the name in the least bit, I think they're lying to you. So yeah, absolutely. I did buy a Rolex to own a Rolex because when you first get into watches, like, A, you don't know much different, but B, like, when you think about where do I want to be when I'm a collector, well, I should have a Rolex by then, right? And that wasn't exactly why I bought it. I had loved the Polar from when I first started, and I really kind of saw it as an unattainable. And that's why when I got the money and I was like, oh, I'm getting a promotion at work, it's a pretty big one, I was like, maybe I'll buy a Rolex. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to go with the one that I liked from day one. I was like, I'm not going to chase a sub because that's what's cool now that you can't get them, even though a couple years ago you could pick them up used for $5,000. Mm-hmm. I was like, I'm not going to do that. I was like, nobody really has love for the Polar at that time. I picked it up way below market value now. And I was like, you know what? I don't care. I'm just going to buy it and I'll wear it. And I wear it in my rotation. It doesn't really get any preference over another one. And that's kind of what I enjoyed about this hobby when I got into it. It was an easy hobby to passively enjoy because especially now with kids, a family, a hectic job, life is busy, and having an active hobby, like I like to golf. I haven't played a round of golf all year. But I can throw on a different watch every day. I can enjoy that day with that watch every single wear, and it's perfectly easy to do. It's passive, and anything cool that happens throughout the day, interaction-wise, is just like icing on the cake, and that's awesome. You know, it's a form of self-expression without having to put too much thought into it. You walk over to the box. Some days it's whatever's ticking. Some days it's, you know, I have a certain thing I have to do that this is going to fit a great use for. Other days you go over, I'm just picking this one. This is what I'm going with.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, it's absolutely. A fairly, I don't want to say it's too much clean fun. You know, you can bury yourself in debt and do crazy things, but for the most part, if you play in the right ballpark, it's a pretty clean, fun hobby, right? I always kind of viewed it as something that, and I've made jokes about this before, you know, plenty of times where my wife has kind of been the butt of the joke because everybody kind of says when they're buying a new watch, oh my God, I have to consider what the wife says. But for the most part, she's really, to be honest, stayed out of it and really has never questioned me.
You're one of the lucky ones. You're one of the lucky ones.
Well, she's never been like, oh, how much did that cost you? Like, she knows what a Rolex is. She saw it, and when I got it, I said, you know what, this is my watch I got for my promotion. You know, I got a big salary bump. And she's like, I get it. Like, I'm not going to press your buttons about it. But
yeah,
I always kind of saw it as a hobby that for the most part would keep me out of trouble. Like, you have certain dudes who are down to go to the strip club every night. You have certain dudes who are tying one on, out with the boys all the time, weekend warrior. This one allows me to still be, you know, around. I can still hang out with the family. I can still go about my daily life, meanwhile having something I really enjoy. And so that's kind of always been the perks of it for me. But from a reflective standpoint, it's always been a fun way to kind of learn about yourself.
Yeah.
Because obviously, I would think you agree with me on this. When you first start collecting, not even from a monetary standpoint, but just from taste perspective, from a maturity perspective, you change so much. And I've only been
100%.
I've only been doing this since maybe 2014, 2015, somewhere in there. And my tastes have evolved so strangely in some areas. But like, I think that's kind of cool, is we're to the point where, A, I don't care it's different from other people. In fact, I kind of enjoy that it's different from other people because if I'm going to hunt down something I really want, I might not have to compete for it, which is great. Where other people, again, following those mentalities of the group, are competing for the black sub that you used to be able to just waltz right in and pluck off the shelf.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that sucks for some people. But if I want something, either whether it's niche or if it's just a less popular brand, like something like Bell & Ross, not that I own one, but if I like something from them, which I do enjoy some of their catalog, I could go in and just grab one, and it doesn't have to be an event. Nobody has to make a comment about it. It's for me. It's not for anybody else. And I've always kind of enjoyed that about it.
And I think that's the right headspace to be in, right? It's a purchase for you.
Yeah.
Right? It's what you want to tell the world, whether good, bad, or indifferent. Okay. It is an extremely personal choice. And when you strap that watch on every single day, you pick one out of the box and you put it on, it's what you want the world to know about you in that moment, in that time, on that day. Right. And that's always been my advice, because, I've worked in the watch industry for years, and I worked, in sales and all these things. And people always used to ask me, it was one of their favorite questions. So what do you think? And my response was always very simple. It's not what I think. I think it looks good. I'll always tell you it looks good. But at the end of the day, you have to wear it. Are you going to be happy with it on your wrist for the next 25 years? And if the answer is no, then it's probably not the right one for you. Yeah, right? It doesn't matter what that honeymoon period is real. It doesn't matter my opinion. It's what you have to love, because it's your purchase, right? I can sit here and tell you it looks amazing every single day because that's my job. But at the end of the day, I'm not the one that has to walk out the door with it, look down on it and be like, this is the best purchase I've ever made, or this is the worst purchase I've ever made. And that's a hard pill to swallow, right? So it's got to be used. Hey, if that new black PVD Bell & Ross diver's your thing, then go for it. Don't ever be afraid to buy something or add something to your collection because the Instagram bros might come after you. Don't ever do that. Buy what you love. If you want to collect 1950s Bulivas and that's your thing,
go nuts.
Do it. Go nuts, man. That's always been my advice to anybody getting in this hobby. Find your niche and go for it. Just don't be like everybody else.
Yeah, that honeymoon period ends quick, man, I'll tell you. And I think everybody's experienced that at some point or another, where you've maybe made a spontaneous purchase and for 2 weeks it's the bee's knees, right? You're posting it, this thing is so sick. And everybody says the same thing. I love this watch. And maybe you do for a little bit.
Yes.
But I don't know if you do for a lot of it, right? Once that honeymoon period ends and all of a sudden you start reaching for the old stuff again, do you go back and pick that one up again, or does it stay in the box and then goes on a forum somewhere? That's always a tough one. But I think that kind of plays into the kind of the interesting aspect of collecting is that you generally have a strategy, I like to think, for your collection or your collecting habits. And then every once in a while you're picking up a spontaneous piece, and sometimes they stick. Sometimes it's not always a bad purchase. I'll say that. It's not always a bad purchase. And a lot of times I think especially if it's an affordable or maybe a very affordable, even if you don't wear it every day, you don't feel so bad about it. But sometimes you can say this one's going to stick, even if it's not super expensive and it's not going to get a ton of wrist time over really cool watches I have, like a Speedmaster or, a Sea Dweller or something. It's not going to take away from them. But once in a while, it's going to get some run and it's still going to be badass. I think as long as you can tell yourself that, you're in good waters there.
Absolutely. And I think that there's certainly a place for those pieces. Like some people get so upset, like, oh, you're collecting a bunch of shitter watches. I'm like, you know what? Sometimes I want to get a taste of a bronze watch without buying a, $15,000 Panerai. Like, it's okay. Like if I want to buy a micro brand and just let it patina and look disgusting, then hey, that's what I want to do for $800. Okay. Like, is it any worse or better of a watch? Absolutely not. It's negligible, but it's just because I liked it. I thought it was cool. I wanted to test out something that I was not comfortable with spending an exorbitantly large amount of money on. And so I did it. Does it take away from the other, high quality luxury pieces that I own? Absolutely not. But sometimes it's just fun to have a watch that's different, that's unique, that is an outlier in your collection, and just test it out. If you like it, great, keep it. If you don't, sell it off, move it out of the collection, make room for something else. But you never really know if you're going to like something until you give it a whirl, right? And give it a shot.
Yeah. And another thing that kind of ties this whole thing together is I've always kind of, on a positive note here, enjoyed collecting because it's a little bit of an old world hobby. Like there aren't many collecting hobbies anymore. I mean, I guess people collect cars. I don't know how you do that because I
Yeah,
can barely
yeah,
collect
yeah.
watches as it is, right? There's art collectors and things like that, but aside from those people out there collecting Pokemon cards and stuff, there's not very many collecting hobbies left. And I feel like that was an old world hobby where you had to hunt things down for one, right? They didn't have the internet, e-commerce, all that stuff to make it a little easier on you. But it was kind of a journey. It was kind of an overtime thing. So I feel like there was real charm to it. And I feel like that's kind of what drew me to it in the first place was when you see people who are like well-versed in things, whether it be somebody who knows a ton about, I don't know, wine or something, right? You go out to eat and they're ripping off different lingo and you're just like, wow. I'm like, I don't know to be impressed or to be like, this person's totally full of shit, but there's something cool about being able to talk in, I guess, a vernacular that a lot of people aren't comfortable in. And then when you meet other people, it's kind of like you're just in a different zone. Whereas you're talking to an average person, you kind of have to, I don't want to say bring it down to layman's terms for them, but you meet another watch person and all of a sudden there's a click and everyone else is just like, what is happening right now?
Yeah,
like,
you're speaking.
But between
you're
the
speaking
two of
another
you,
language.
it makes total sense.
Yeah, exactly.
And I just think there's not a lot like that out there anymore. I can't really think of too many hobbies like that.
And to your point about collecting and it certainly being old world, the other thing too that I think so many people miss about watch collecting is it's one of the only collecting things you can do that's still practical.
Yeah.
I get to wear my watch and let it tell time. When you collect art and you're a serious art collector, you have certain pieces that you display and you have certain pieces that you hoard because the light will damage the art. The same thing with wine. The same thing with cars. You can only drive one of them, and half the time you really can't drive them because everyone else around you will destroy your car, right?
Or it's winter.
Watches are one of those few things in the world that you can truly collect, that you can truly appreciate, and you can truly use on a daily basis, regardless of the age of the piece, right? Doesn't matter if it's a 1950s Vacheron or it's a brand new Patek or, a 2008 Omega Seamaster. It doesn't matter. If you buy it, you can still use it. Whether you use it all the time or not, it's still somewhat practical to take with you. And I think that's part of the beauty of watch collecting is there is a story, and that story in some ways is tangible with your daily life, right? You go out and you rock something like a 50s Vacheron and somebody notices it, that's already a conversation starter.
That's wild.
It's, it's awesome.
It is. And what's funny is when I owned a more modern Speedy. The one I have now is an old boy, but previously I owned a modern iteration of a Speedy, not the most modern, but the 311, not the most recent one that just came out, the one before it. And I brought it to the Omega Boutique in the city, New York City, of course. And I got my bracelet size because I wanted to check out the AD and, get the whole experience, right? Because I bought it online at a steep discount, which you can't get anymore. And, I get the whole Omega experience. My wife's with me and she's kind of taking it in and being like, all right, this is kind of neat. We go to eat somewhere right after. I look over at we sit at the bar and I look over at the guy eating next to us, Speedmaster. Like, what are the odds? What are the odds of that? I'm
instant connection.
Yeah, instant connection, and B, I'm like floored with my new Speedmaster, and I look at this guy and he's got one right next to me. Like, given the small percentage of the population that watch collectors are, to me that was like serendipity.
Yeah.
Which is another point that I think you and I both agree on that a lot of people don't take into account is how small of a percentage the watch collector really is. And I'm not talking about watch buyer. I'm talking about watch collector. The people who are having the conversations when you go to a red bar or something, right? You're talking to watch collectors. You're not talking to the person who strolled in because they said, you know what? I just started my own business. I'm a boss now. I need to get my Rolex. Hand me my Rolex. And they're like, which one? And they're like, I don't know. The one I see everybody else has.
That'll be a 210 date just, sir.
Right. So you're not talking to that person. I'm talking the watch collector is such a small percentage of the, I guess, consumer base. And I think we forget that sometimes. And I think that's also part of why I don't really understand some outrages that happen within the greater watch community, as I like to call it, is that people get bent out of shape about certain things, the way things are marketed. And I just want to be like, you realize we are such a small group. Like there's probably a ton of market research and a ton of data that would go totally against our opinions, the way we feel about things, but totally support why they do X, Y, and Z a certain way. And I always try to step back and remember that, because it's easy to get pissed off when.
Absolutely.
Oh, for
it's
example,
super easy.
For example, I'll throw an ad at you. Breitling makes a 36 millimeter Super Ocean now. It looks awesome, and I would totally like to try one on. Am I going to buy one? I'm not so sure. They label it a women's watch.
Right.
Seems like a bad move on their part. I don't know. That's my perspective. Maybe they have a ton of data that refutes that, and I'm just an idiot. So I always try to take a step back and not try to jump to conclusions, which I think we are a little irresponsible as a group. I won't necessarily call anybody out on that, but I think we're quick to make snap judgments and shoot first, ask questions later, whereas there's probably a good reason for the way they do things. It's just not the reason we want.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and this podcast, it sounds like we're teetering on just about getting canceled with our first episode. But you know what? If this is the only episode that we ever air, and this is the last statement that people hear from us about, how we feel about the watch industry, it needs to be said. So I kind of understand, kind of what you're talking about, specific genders and assigning men, ladies, all this stuff, especially based on size. I will tell you this from my own sales experience. I never, ever referred to watches by gender, right? And I know that this came up because Cara Barrett from Houdinki, a few years back or last year or so, wrote a huge article that got so much negative press. And it really wasn't necessary that it did, but it was exposing the idea that, we need to stop referring to men's and ladies' watches based on gender, right? And to some degree, I agree with the statement. But to another degree, I don't agree. Because again, to your point, the average watch consumer is not the watch collector. Right. It's some guy or some girl who's going to walk into a store and consume whatever that retailer has to purchase. And I will tell you, quite often, even today in 2021, which might seem a little strange, people will walk into a store and be like, hey, where are your ladies' watches? In no way, shape, or form would I ever be like, I'm sorry, sir, that's not the correct term that we utilize for the watch industry. We prefer the term unisex models, right? Like, this is not going to happen. I'm going to show the guy what he would consider to be ladies' watches, right? Now, where I agree with Cara is that there's a lot of traditionally old school men's timepieces, in air quotes, if you will, that more and more women are wearing, because it is a personal fashion choice. And now more ladies are getting interested into serious watches. So they want to wear something that is a serious watch to purchase, right? They want to wear a 36. They want to wear a 42. They want to wear a 44. I'm not going to judge. At that point, watches are genderless to me. Like, somebody comes in and buys a moon watch, it's a moon watch. Yeah. It's not a men's moon watch, right?
They have female astronauts, last I checked.
I mean, but the other thing too is, like, it's a moon watch. Call it by its name. Yeah. Right? Like, if a lady comes in like, I want to buy a Navitimer, it's a Navitimer. They don't call it the ladies' Navitimer or the men's Navitimer. It's a Navitimer, right? And today, the pieces that are kind of more controversial, your 36 millimeter Datejust, your OPs, your moon watches, your diver 300 meters. Last time I checked, people weren't calling them men's or ladies. It's just the watch. And a lot of times brands get away with it by calling it by its size. And I can't fault you for that. It's a 36 mil Datejust, right? It's a 42 mil diver 300 meter. Oh gosh, what are the sizes now? 42 mil Navitimer, right? It's the size. Call it by its name. It's completely unnecessary. So we're assigning things that are and creating problems that aren't really there for the sake of creating problems. And I think, again, to reiterate your point, that in a lot of ways, it's because we forget that we're not the major purchasing demographic. Right. We're certainly an important one, but we're extremely niche. We're looking for the Ultramans and the Petite Princes and the Bronzos, like the really esoteric specialty pieces within watch brand collections. The average consumer is not. The average consumer who walks into a Panerai boutique is like, yeah, give me that Panerai base logo and we'll call it a day. I finally got my Pan. You know, like that's kind of the way it goes. They're not looking for the crazy specialty models, right? Unless they saw it in GQ somewhere, and then they have to look for the crazy models.
Well, I also think that's kind of part of what has changed a lot since I started, I guess, collecting watches. Was it's become a lot more, you know, you mentioned GQ and you mentioned people who your average consumer would go in and buy the one that they know that everybody else has shown them, right? Like you said, a two-tone Datejust. Well, now I feel like a lot of these blogs or whoever have seen those people in the stores and they say, well, how do I hook those people back in? Well, they clearly came here because they came to buy this two-tone Datejust because they know it sends a message, right? So now I feel like if we try to sell them a lifestyle, if we try to sell them watch collecting as, I guess, a flex overall and how it reflects on the rest of your life, even though it doesn't, I think if we can sell them that notion, we'll hook them and then we'll have future watch people. And now you have kind of that whole wealth enthusiasm thing playing in where there are accounts that are dedicated to quote unquote watch collecting lifestyle. And it's every night these multi-course dinners and Lamborghinis and high-end pieces it's hard to get. And first of all, completely unrealistic. I always like to remember that I think the average salary in the United States is 33 grand a year. Right.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And even if you have a credit card, they're only allotting you so much credit, right? And you definitely have other expenses in your life. I don't think anybody making that much is chasing down, you know, a gray market Daytona. You know what I mean? Like it's almost impossible.
Yeah, it's more than they make in a year,
right?
I mean, like again, it's absolutely impossible.
So we're selling this pipe dream to who? And sometimes I try to figure it out. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of people who make a lot of money in this country, but
in this world too.
Yeah,
I mean, just in general.
I like to think when I think about I don't know the salary breakdown for the rest of the world. I just happen to know that one. Believe it or not, from Bar Rescue. I don't know why I was on there, but I remember it stuck with me that that median household income is like 50 and the individual is like 30, and I was just kind of like, wow, you know, that's. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of different socioeconomic areas in this country where, you know, sure. I live close to New York City. Meanwhile, you have some very rural areas where, you know, there's probably just a few town stores. It's very spread out. You know, that was kind of, I went to school in upstate New York, and a lot of people would tell me, oh, I have to drive miles and miles just to get to the next grocery store. Like, I was like, I'd go around the corner.
Yeah.
It was kind of like a culture
shock.
There's
like 7 bodegas at the
exactly.
It was like,
exactly.
Come on.
So it was kind of a culture shock for me when you leave those city limits, and I guess you kind of realize your ignorance. But I always kind of try to think of it on that level, and you know, I read comment sections once in a while. You know, I like to have fun, and I see people who are like, I think there's millions and millions of people looking for subs, and that's why there's scarcity. And again, I go back to, I'm like, how many people make enough money to chase this stuff down, let alone be into the hobby enough to know that you can't get a sub and I have to chase one down? It becomes a big rabbit hole of thinking, and yeah. I wind up getting either frustrated or lost, and I quit. But
I'll put it to you this way. The Submariner has always been one of the most popular Rolex watches.
Oh, for sure.
Always. So how in the last 10 years, let's call it 10 years, has it become so popular that now it's impossible to have? It's not. It's because Rolex is purposefully restricting their product in a way that drives up the demand, okay? It drives up the demand. They release so much of they release small amounts of their product to their retailers. Those retailers have all of that product they get already pre-sold, 100%. Okay. And the thing is that Rolex has in terms of marketing and selling is this idea that now they sell everything in their catalog. Okay. Rolex is the only watch brand on the planet that will sell every item in its catalog. And let me explain why.
Because nobody buying that code 1159. That's why.
Well, there's that too. But they're selling everything because the average Joe Schmo person who finally gets a big promotion, they walk into an AD and all they can buy is a two-tone Datejust. They're not a watch collector. They don't care that it's not a Submariner in stainless steel. Why? Because it's still got a crown on the dial. So they're happy, right? All of those clients that have a high purchase history with those respective institutions, those watches come in, they get called. Those watches never even leave the vault. They never leave the floor, but they're already all pre-sold anyway, right? But Rolex is making close to 1 million watches a year. There's no way all of those are hitting the market. They're releasing some. Those watches sell, and whatever they release is going to sell, right? And this goes all the way up to even the crazy, crazy, crazy expensive pieces, like, Rainbow Daytonas and all that stuff that they make that's extremely esoteric, in my opinion, pretty gaudy, but ultimately very, very desirable. So they sell everything. It's not that there's, this whole, and that press release that they came out with, I have so much fault with that because they came out and said, oh, well, we don't want to sacrifice our quality and what we're doing, so we're not going to increase production. That is BS. They produce millions of watches, okay? They just don't allow those watches to hit the market in a way that would flood it. They control their product releases. They only give their retailers so much, and all of those products become sold instantly because there's lists of people waiting to get them, right? So it's complete BS. And then the worst part of it is at the very end of that PR thing, and if you haven't seen it, it's all over Houdinki, it's all over everywhere, is they put ultimately the fault on the retailer. It's like, hey, at the end of the day, the retailers decide the allocation. They get to
decide who gets it.
That is such a cop-out from them. It's like, hey, we need to address this big thing. It's a PR thing. We understand it, blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, your local AD is screwing you. So there you go. Take it or leave it. That to me is just, it's so irritating. So irritating.
And for me, the weirdest part of that whole thing was, why would Rolex ever comment on that? I have no clue.
Apparently,
it seemed to me almost like somebody, hey, let me wine and dine you. A few too many scotches. Next thing you know, the tea comes out. And at that point, the dam is broken and the water's just going. And that's the way it felt to me.
It seems so weird.
It's super weird.
And in reading the breakdown article that Houdinki wrote about it, and they're like, the justification's like, well, Yahoo, and it was funny because it came out with like Yahoo News. Like they're the ones who broke the press release because apparently they were the only ones to ever ask Rolex like why there is a supply chain shortage. Or why there's a delivery product shortage. Like that was written in the Houdinki article. Like nobody thought to ask the most renowned brand in the world why they can't get watches except for Yahoo News. Like if this is the level of watch journalism that we get in 2021, like we're missing a couple steps here. So I didn't think I was going to be the controversial one on this podcast, but here we are.
That's it. We'll take turns. It's fine. Yeah, I'll bring it out when the time comes. But I think what you're also talking about there is another issue that I personally have taken with our hobby as it is the concept of journalism is almost dead to me. I talked about it before. Money talks. It's a lot of pay for play. It's a lot of we pay you, you write the article, we okay it, or we pay you, we'll send you the article, you publish it. I mean, it's not a coincidence you get all the same exact pictures in everybody's articles.
It's all press release.
Right. Yeah. And so it makes you think how much of the entire release is original? You know, how much of any of this is the original thought, or how much of this is just you need to include X, Y, and Z, and that's it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, because for brands, I mean, this is all PR. Good, bad, or indifferent, it's all PR, and it's necessary for them to continue to sell product, because at the end of the day, they're coming out with new products every single year that the consumer base has to consume. So the best way to do this is to basically promote yourself from a third party,
Right.
to get the message out there. And that's what all of these reviewers are. That's what all these editorial content creators are. It's a way to help self-promote the brand. I'll give you a little check on the side. You write a nice, beautiful article about my stuff, or cover it on XYZ, radio or podcast or internet blog or whatever.
Yeah, we'll get it in your hands, which gives you content, right? You can make your 10-minute video or get your photos. And it's kind of a self-perpetuating issue, is that
correct?
We give you, you give us. Everybody's getting a handshake except the consumer.
Absolutely.
Right. And so who's the one who winds up with a watch that isn't as cool as everybody made it out to be? Next thing you know, on the forums, because catch and release for me, never bonded with it. Right. That's the one. Never bonded with it. Catch and release. My loss is your gain.
Yes, exactly. The typical keywords that everyone sees.
Yeah, exactly. Make yourself the prototypical the typical listing and just go from there. Right?
Oh man.
But that's what happens, right?
No, it's true. It's absolutely true. Absolutely true. 100%.
Even when I like to think I'm not guilty of this, because when I find a new release and I'll put it up and I say, this looks cool, I'll get a bunch of people pop right in the DM, copped it already, pre-ordered, whatever. I'm like, that was a little trigger happy. Don't get me wrong, I think it's great, but maybe I'm gonna wait for more pictures at least to come out first.
Yeah, there's very few pieces that I would have to own instantly, and I can think of one off the top of my head that was really cool, that I was like, man, this watch would be sweet. I have a few Doxas in my collection already. This would be an awesome addition. There was a Doxa that came out in titanium. That was, I think, during Geneva Watch Days it was released, but it was a Time and Tide watch blog exclusive.
A few weeks ago.
Right? Yeah, a few weeks ago or a month ago at this point, depending on when you're listening to this podcast. And essentially it was like a 200-piece release, I think, which is not uncustomary for Doxa. Doxa usually does an LE, and it's a fairly low production run. 300 pieces, 500 pieces, so very, very small
a real LE.
Again, yeah, a real LE. And again, hey, no hate for some of the big brands out there with bigger LE runs, because this is global allocation, ladies and gentlemen. So let's be honest. More people are going to wear an Omega over a Doxa. Okay, so there's also some.
You do have to take that into account.
You had to take that into account. Let's call it like it is. But this watch is cool. It was titanium, integrated rubber strap, had the first kind of like titanium folding clasp that Doxa had done. Looks amazing. But it was a little thick boy. And when I first saw the photo renderings drop, I was like, oh my God, do I have the 2,000 or so US to buy this? I'm starting to think and evaluate my bank account. Like, is my wife going to notice? All of these things are going through my head. And then I see the photo from the side, and I'm like, I didn't like the way the strap integrated to the case. And it felt like it was going to sit a little heavy, a little high. And I was like, you know what? Maybe this is okay to let it go. Maybe they'll come out with one in stainless steel in the next couple of years or next few months or whatever. And maybe that would be one to revisit, right? So, I mean, sometimes, we get so trigger happy that we just like have to buy it like instantly, or else we'll miss out. And we shouldn't have done it. We should have taken a pause, and we should have just thought this through before getting caught on the hype train, because 17 blogs all said this is the new hot watch of that day, right?
I would love to know how many people who bought the Hodinkee Blue Alpinist still have it. I'm guilty. I bought one, sold it. Now, I didn't flip it. I bought it, wore it, probably a year. But what happened was I wound up buying a watch I really, really wanted. And I said, these kind of occupy the same space. I would like to recoup some of the money I spent on this. This guy can go, and you know what? I'm going to get a buff sticker for it. So why not, right? So I would like to know how many people kept that. And that was a cool watch. I really, really enjoyed it. I really did.
Yeah, that was a cool release and a cool collab. And I mean, it's like, it's kind of the unofficial joke too, of whenever there's a new Houdinki drop, because they drop and they're immediately on Chrono 24.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's like they're immediately on Watch Recon. Boom. Like, I got one. Finally got in the mail.
And that was, I think that was the drop that really brought that to my attention, because I got one and everybody immediately was like, I'll pay double for it. And I was like, yeah. Is this serious? Because I wanted it. I wanted to keep it. I'm a big Seiko fan.
And you're like, for the Seiko?
Right.
Double? For the Seiko?
But the Alpinist, which was, a beloved model at that point, the 017, in blue, right? Blue was super hot at that point. It checked so many boxes. I was like, but I want to keep this. I don't want to. I didn't buy it to make more money. So I did wind up selling it eventually, which happens. I'm not going to fault anybody for moving on from pieces, but
no,
I would wonder
if you don't love it, or if it. I would say this: that it's probably very low, probably very, very, very low. And again, it's just because most people are probably like, "Hey, this is a money-making opportunity. Let me buy this. Let me move it because somebody really wants it." And they're going to be willing to pay for it.
This is not my Grail sub that I waited so long for.
Yeah, and I still sold it anyway, right? Like,
right. If I'm selling that, what can I sell at that point?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's gotten to be so crazy. The collecting world today, never in my wildest dreams, getting into watches would I have ever thought that we would have ended up at this point. Never. Because I still remember the days where being a watch collector, like, you were the weirdo. Like, you would go to family gatherings and they're like, yeah, that guy's willing to spend $5,000 on a watch. And Uncle Larry's like, what the hell are you talking about? $5,000? This Timex takes a beating and keeps on ticking. You're like, okay, like, calm down, Larry. You've had a couple too many Manhattans, right? Like, it's just a watch. And that was kind of the thing, right? Like, we were the weird kids that liked weird things, and nobody understood it. And now too many people understand it. Everything's been co-opted, and now it's just this ginormous money marketing machine. How do we get back?
And I think that's a good question.
Do you ever get back?
Yeah, I've wondered, where do we go going forward? And I guess you can't really predict it too well, because there's too much global economics that are kind of, I feel like, on knife edge at, between all
at any point in time.
Yeah, between the past year and a half and just everything that's happened economically, there's too much speculation, I guess, to assume what could happen economically, because you would have to assume if the global economy took a giant nosedive, luxury goods can't stay at a premium. It just can't happen. But again, everybody said that was going to happen with stocks and everything, and they went plenty high. And, now they're getting kind of strange again. But it was kind of this weird uncertainty, and I think that's what we have going forward is uncertainty. I don't think anybody can really place a finger on it. You definitely have people trying to make those investments, right? You have people that buy investment pieces that are holding on to things, that are safe queening things, that are planning to cash out on them eventually. And it's a little bit of a gamble. I don't know if that's what's going to happen, but going forward, I don't know how we get back unless it just cools off. Maybe the hobby cools off. Things run in streaks, right? Pokemon cards just made a comeback. Right? When I was 12, I had a ton of them. I could have sold those for a boatload of money now, but
yeah, for sure.
That's
if we had all the first editions. We have all the first editions that we had when we were like 6 years old, 7 years old, 8 years old. We would have been.
Yeah, I could have sold those to Jake Paul for a mint.
Yeah, it's like, come on, are you kidding me? But I think there's some credibility in your point, and I think too that I'm going to go out on this statement, and this is the cross I'm willing to die on. That basically, like, if you're trying to collect and invest, this, like, in some cases you're in the right space, In a lot of cases, you're not. Because I'll say this, every single watch today that is extremely popular, extremely collectible, like all of these things, they were by and large commercial failures when they were like actually being sold, right? Paul Newman Daytona, perfect example. These watches are gangbuster watches. They go for an extremely absorbent amount of money. And here's the thing, they're not really worth it. But unpopular opinion, back in the day when they were actually being sold in the Rolex catalog, they were utter and complete failures. They had hideous looking dials. Nobody wanted to buy them. They had pushers at one point that you had to unscrew to use the chronograph, and that was fiddly. And for the average consumer, they didn't want to deal with it. Oh, and by the way, it was a manual wind at twice the cost of a traditional Submariner, and it wasn't chronometer certified. Like, why would I buy this watch? Oh, and it didn't have a date, right? So for so many reasons, the consumer base was like, this is not the watch. And for years, retailers had to buy these from Rolex. They had to stock them in their case lines. They had to have them as part of their core purchase in order to carry the rest of the line, but they never sold. And for decades and decades and decades, retailers had these old, dusty, new old stock Daytonas chilling in their vaults until finally some dudes on the dark forums in the early 90s were like, hey, these watches are probably pretty rare. Let's start buying them. I heard a story, and I don't know if this is true. I heard it from secondhand, but I heard a story of a dude that was one of the early forum guys that started getting into the Rolex Daytona hype back in the day, before there was any hype for a Rolex Daytona, especially the ones from the Paul Newman era, that basically he went to a guy who had 30 of them in his vault for like 30 years, right? Something crazy. And he's like, I'll give you $1,500 for each one of them. And the guy's like, finally, I can get these the hell out of my vault. $1,500 for each one. Okay. It was like double the money that guy had actually invested in those watches when he bought them from Rolex, right? And they'd just been sitting there dusty and nobody wanted them. Guy sold a whole batch at $1,500 a pop. What do you think happened to all those 30 Daytonas? That guy made a small fortune.
He's retired.
There's no way to know if that will ever happen. Okay? There's no way to know. Like, the market could fall out on the Daytona tomorrow. I don't think it's going to happen, but it could. Market conditions change considerably fast. And if you're trying to bank on the fact that all of these watches that you've invested are somehow going to net you a profit, there's a good chance it couldn't, right? It's almost a 50-50 shot.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, you go back to the early 2000s, right? Who was killing it? Hublot? Panerai?
Ebel?
I mean,
nobody knows that brand anymore,
yeah,
but Ebel back in the day. Like, let's be honest. I mean, Frank Mueller.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, Chrono Swiss. Like, there were so many brands that were just laying straight fire pieces for the
and people were gobbling
consumer,
them up.
and they were gobbling it up. I mean, I can't tell you how many crazy hour Frank Mueller watches that were just getting pumped out these doors, and all of a sudden, 5 years later, people were like, "Oh, this really isn't the it watch anymore. It's really hard to tell the time, right?"
Yeah.
Like, it was a cool novelty when it was cool. It's like, oh yeah, I want to be different. My numerals are different colors. It's all funky. It's kind of like a stretched out clown watch. Like, it looks cool. And then you start using it day to day, and you're like, this is completely impractical. Like, I can't do it. And that's kind of, without getting on too much on tangent, like, that's kind of how I feel about the Bulgari, like the Octos. Like, yeah. I love the design. Groundbreaking, amazing, award-winning, thin watches. Is it going to be the it watch in 10 years? I don't know. Right? And it seems like Bulgari is leaning into this like Octo design that at some point they're only going to be known as the Octo, right? It's going to be like AP's problem, right? Like, it's only the Royal Oak. Like, nobody cares about the Millenary or the Code 1159.
Yeah, I can't even tell you the name of that other Bulgari with the black bezel.
Aluminum?
I can't even tell you the name of it. It's
an aluminum something.
Yeah,
it's got like a hinged rubber strap. It's like, okay. It's
Yeah.
a cool. I'll say this: it's a cool looking watch. Is it my cup of tea? Absolutely not. But that watch is immensely popular with a lot of people. And again, are they super duper watch collectors? No, there's the average consumer is like, yeah, Bulgari's a good brand. Let me go buy one of those. Watch collectors buy the Octos. That's the difference, right?
Right, because they're impressed with the specs, right? You look how thin this is, it's super
World's
light.
thinnest movement, baby. That micro rotor will get you every time.
Is it? Did they beat the Altiplano? The Piaget?
It's like Piaget and Bulgari literally like every year, and
Yeah.
it's like one comes out with a micro rotor ultra thin, and then the next one it's like I think Octo came out with or Bulgari came. Yeah, see, I'm already calling it Octo.
Yeah.
It might as well be that. Bulgari comes out with like the world's thinnest chronograph with a micro. Like it's crazy. They're just kind of like back and forth.
The mini arms race.
Yeah, it's just for it's the mini arms race of watches that would be completely impractical, and if you ever do anything physically demanding in them, you'll just destroy the balance wheel. It's just what's going to happen.
Yeah, definitely
no shock protection in those bad boys. Okay,
definitely
guys?
a watch for limited use or a
Absolutely.
limited range. I'll say a limited range of use, not a limited use. Limited range of use.
If
right?
you ever golf in your Octo,
oh god,
send it in. It's done. You have sheared those pivots off to pure oblivion. It would be like you taking a piece of graphite pencil lead and just snapping it in place. Like that's what's going to happen to the inside of your movement. It's done.
Not a good look.
R.I.P. Octo.
But yeah, no, I think kind of everything we've just spoken to is maybe the center of my gripes with kind of where we are today is a mix of everything is kind of branded as great because it has to be, because almost everything you're seeing is an advertisement. A mix of the enthusiasm for having expensive things where it used to be somebody could have saved up for an expensive watch and they could have been Joe Schmo. But you know what? They got their hands on that one that they saved up for, and that's
Absolutely.
Cool. And like, it didn't come with a lifestyle, right? They're still going to work the next day. They're not
and that legacy is dead. Yeah. Unfortunately, it is dead. Like the guy who bought the Submariner because he walked into the jewelry store and he was like just like a carpenter dude who just wanted a solid, tough as nails watch he saw in a magazine, and he worked for the last 20 years to finally save up and buy one. Like that legacy is dead. Now the Submariner's been co-opted by the Wall Street bro. Like trim fitted suits, small skinny ties, and 41 mil ceramic Submariner. Like, I mean, it's just reality. Like, I can't tell you how many times that I've seen people who owned a watch that they brought into the store at some point in my past, my former life, that they had no idea what it was even cool. Like I had a guy one time bring in an original pre-moon 321 Speedmaster. Wow. Original pre-moon 321. It was new old stock. Basically,
that's
this guy had worn it, but it was like he had like gingerly worn it on special occasions because it was like his nice watch. He spent a lot of money to buy it, right? When he came in, and I'm like looking at this, I'm like, well, how old is it? Like, oh, it's I think it's 67 or 68, something like that. I'm like, okay. I had our watchmaker open the case back. I'm like, oh my god, this is a 321. He goes, well, what do those numbers mean? Like this guy legitimately had no idea like any of this stuff. And I'm like, well, this is the moon watch. And he's like, what do you mean it's a moon watch? And I'm just sitting here dumbfounded, right? I was like, this is the watch the U.S. space program, all the astronauts wore when they walked on the moon. And he goes, no shit.
That's pretty cool.
Like, I mean, like, yeah, he's like, this guy bought the watch a year or two before we actually landed on the moon, had no connection or understanding, which I don't even understand how, because I mean, how many Omega articles did they pump out at that time? Like, this is the watch the astronauts wear. But this is just the tell. Like, that was a guy who was just your average working class person, walked into a jewelry store, spent a little bit of money, probably more than he should have at the time, and bought something that he thought was cool. He wore it. That was his watch for the next 40, 50 years. And he finally brought it in to have it serviced. Okay. Literally had no idea that 2 years later, the same watch was being strapped to the wrist of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walking on the lunar surface and became one of the most iconic chronographs of all time. To him, it was just his watch.
With a nice little timing function.
You know, like, right. Yeah, it was cool. It was a little bit bigger than the other ones in the case, and I liked the black dial. Like, that was what it was. Like, that legacy is dead. It's gone. Okay. And it just kills me because that is truly watch ownership in the most pure form.
That's when it was fun.
When you literally, yeah, when you just, you're like, yeah, this one feels like me. Let me buy it. No agenda, no marketing, just this is a cool thing and I want to own it. It looks cool.
I think one of my biggest pet peeves is I have to think about resale when I'm buying a watch.
Yeah.
Like that is a thing now. That used to not be a thing because almost every watch used to lose money as soon as you took it out of the package.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Now it's, I don't want to lose money on resale, which again, still a lot of them do, but not as much anymore. And
yeah,
it used to be, okay, Rolexes didn't lose money. Now, my Black Bay 58 Blue doesn't lose money. I have to worry about resale. That's why I don't buy the watch I want. I buy the watch that is economically sensible for me not to lose money because I'm probably going to wind up selling it down the line anyway because I don't really want this one to begin with. That's what bugs me.
That for me, and this is another 100% unpopular opinion. I don't buy watches to sell them. Period. I don't. If there's something that I find that I don't wear, I give it to somebody, or I move it out of the collection. Or if I do sell it, I will sell it at what I got it for, right? To somebody that I trust, somebody that I know, somebody that would truly benefit from it. Because for me, I loved it at one time, right? I loved it at one time. And there's a lot of times I think too, where people, they think that they fall out of love with a watch. But what actually happens is they just don't remember why they loved it in the first place.
I could see that.
Because there's so many times where, I haven't worn a watch in 6 months or a year, right? And I open my watch box. I'm like, oh, little Pepsi Timex Q. You're not a watch I wear all the time. This is a great day to put you on my wrist, right? Or I'll open up my case and there's my Doxa Sub 200 just chilling. And I'm like, you know what? This is the time. I'm going to go to the beach, going to crush some beers. Like, I'm going to wear that
Today is your day, my friend.
Today is your day. And then you put it on and you're like, oh my God.
I did like this.
I remember why I love this stupid thing. But I think so many people get caught up in the resale and the hype train. And, if you're not wearing it, it's not making you money. Like, there's so many different trains of thought here that I don't get. Because for me, it's like, if I really don't love something, I'll find a way to move it on. But I want to move it on to somebody that I know will benefit from it. I can't tell you how many G-Shocks and, little micro brands I've given away over the years because, they fell out of favor with me, but my buddies or somebody I knew or, somebody's kids graduating from high school and they kind of into watches, like, give it to that guy, give it to that person. Right now I know we're talking about smaller, expensive watches here. Nobody's giving away Pepsi GMTs and things, right? But it's for me, I don't buy things unless I know that I love them. That was always my benchmark, right? If I was going to tell the people that I sold watches to back in the day, you have to love it for the next 10, 15 years, right? That to me is my benchmark. If I can't see myself doing that, then I don't buy it in the first place. And I don't buy watches to try to make money on them. I never have because I don't care. And the watches that people want to make money on are the watches that everyone else wants. So therefore, I don't want those watches.
I can appreciate that. I
know it's super unpopular, and everyone's gonna be like, "What the hell is this dude talking about?"
Well, you know what it is? I wish I had people that I could give my cheapos to. Like, I don't even know people that would be like, "Yeah, I'll take that." Yeah, cool, thanks. Like, I would try to give it to my brother, and he'd be like, this is a little small for me because it's not 46 millimeters. You know what I mean? Like,
It's not an Invicta.
that's what I'm saying. He's I don't know, he's a macho dude, you know, he's got like a pretty physical job.
Yeah,
So
but
he'd
I
be
mean,
like, this is not me. Like, I'm not trying to wear this, but I'd be like, I would have to sit there and convince him, yeah, but do you know what this is? This is cool because XYZ. It's
but
got
that's part. I think that's part of our job too, is watch people, is to kind of spread the gospel, if you will.
I agree with
Because
that.
I'll be honest with you.
That's why you make a meme
The
account.
Yeah, I mean, like, well, I mean, there's that, right? Like, but the average person doesn't know crap about watches because they've grown up with digital time. They've grown up with Apple watches,
Cell phones.
cell phones. So it's like the average consumer, especially if you're, Gen Z or millennial or even, a late boomer, you've grown up with time in a digitalized format, right? And so for the average person, it just doesn't resonate. But once you start explaining to them, the micromechanics, the precision engineering, the fact that these things can last a lifetime, people start to kind of understand the emotional connection that a watch can have. Because for me, a watch truly is the physical manifestation of the life that we've lived, good, bad, or indifferent, right? Every dent, every scratch, this is all stuff that makes our life have meaning and purpose. And for me, when I leave that watch behind or I give that watch to somebody, they'll always have a physical, tangible thing that relates to me somehow, right? That to me is all I could ever want. So if I can help kind of share that message with somebody who's somewhat receptive to it and they get it, and then you give them something that they can like, oh man, like I really get it. That's kind of how it starts. And the more people that do that, the more people that enjoy that and share that, which I don't really think happens that much anymore, to be honest with you. Maybe not giving away watches, but even just talking about how awesome watches really are outside of the community. We're not doing the next generation well. We're not serving them well.
Yeah, I think it used to be a little bit more a rite of passage almost, but now, it used to be you sat down with your uncle, your grandpa, your dad at your family gatherings or whatever, and you have nothing else to talk about. What are you going to talk about? Well, let's just find a common ground, right? So we're talking about, let me tell you about this watch, right? And it was like a cool, kind of off the beaten track niche thing, but like you had nothing better to do, so it was all right. Now everybody's got a phone, they're they're texting people, they're searching for stuff. It doesn't really lend itself to that kind of storytelling aspect that used to be kind of so charming about, oh, let me tell you about where I bought this. I bought this when I was overseas. I know so many people, oh, my grandfather bought this when he was overseas. I have a buddy whose grandfather bought a Longines pocket watch when he was stationed in Europe during World War II. He's got it. He just got it cleaned up. Awesome. And it's pretty clean. So cool. It's still pretty clean, but like that's an heirloom right there. You know what I mean? That's something that one day he can pass on to either his nieces or if he has kids, his own kids, and be like, do you know where this came from? This was at a time where like the world was very uncertain and it made its way all the way here, and now you have it. To me, that's always been kind of the coolest thing is like, do you know where this has been? Do you know how many lives this has lived? Meanwhile, the person who bought it is not even around anymore. Like that's like what's
not just them.
Mind.
They're not just not around. Like their entire family lineage basically is not around at this point. This watch is so old. Like that is so cool.
It is, and it's almost like that living legacy that you can't really describe. And to me, that was always a really appealing part of wanting to collect something that can withstand the test of time like that. Whereas, like you said, you have to be more careful with, where you have to be more careful with things like art or artifacts and things that fall apart very easily that you don't really want to show people. Yeah. And that's even cooler, right? You're right. And not only that, but you service those old things, and sometimes you can't, but parts availability, etc. But in the event you can service those old things, and you're still keeping sick good time. Like, to me, that's super cool. Like, this is from so long ago, and it's still doing what the watch I just bought last week is doing.
Yeah, I have
just as good.
I have an anecdotal story. I have a vintage Seamaster that a good friend of mine, he kind of knew I always wanted one, and this guy, he used to be like a pawn shop troll. Like, he'd go to the local pawn shops and like try to see what he could find. This dude would find the craziest things, and he was a big Omega guy, and he would find Mark IIs. He would find, TVK Seamaster, like the craziest stuff, right? And stuff that you're just like, what? Like at the local pawn shop, you found that? And how much did you pay for it? Oh yeah, I picked it up for $300. I'm like, what? Like, just crazy, right? So he comes back this one day and he's got this busted Seamaster, but it's so beautiful. Steel case, which is always kind of like my criteria for a vintage piece. Steel case, simple dial, no date, not a bumper movement, all these things, right? And he picks up for $80. And he's like, I know you've always kind of wanted this. This is obviously a project watch, and I don't want to kind of like impose this on you, but if you want this, I'll sell it to you for what I paid for it, which is $80. And I was like, wow, $80 is actually not a bad idea. And I knew that wasn't going to serve. I knew I wasn't going to service it at any time. It was just like, it'd be kind of cool to have on the back burner in case that time ever came up where I could send this baby in and get it, reconditioned. So eventually I'm mulling it over, and he comes back to me like the next week. He goes, you know what, dude? Just take it. I'm not going to do anything with it.
That's insane.
Just take it. So he gave me this watch for free, which at that point, I was fully prepared to pay for him. He's like, I don't care. We're friends. Just take it. Wow. So again, pay it forward, guys, right?
Yeah.
So he gives this watch to me, and I must have had it in my watch box collecting dust, and it didn't run. Like the dial, like a lot of collectors were like, oh, that's beautiful patina. No, that was straight up decay. It had black mold like growing in the in the lacquered finish. Like, it was horrible. And I had it in my watch box for 2 years, and I would always kind of like set it to make it look like it was running, but it really didn't run. The hands didn't line up right when they hit the hour. It was a big old mess. I finally mulled up the courage, saved up the money, and sent it to Omega. It took over 6 months for them to restore this piece. I got it back from Switzerland. It runs at 2 seconds a day.
Wow.
It's over 60 years old. I hope at 60 years old, I'm still keeping pace with myself at the age I am now. Good luck, right? Like, this baby is a accuracy champion. Like, and again, nothing in my world that I own that is even close to being that old is running or working that efficiently. Just nothing. I mean, it's pretty impressive. So, shout out to the guys at Omega. They really know what they're doing. If you guys have ever thought about sending a vintage piece, do it. They'd take incredible care of you. So no hesitations.
I think on that note, very touching story. I think we could wrap up episode 1 here. What do you say, Schmitty?
I'm full with you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Until next time, we'll keep hitting record. You keep hitting play. Catch you then.